Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Theological Leftovers. Today, I want to give some advice, especially to small congregations. Now, if you're a part of a larger congregation, feel free to take this advice too. If you disagree with this advice, or you think I'm missing something, I would really like your feedback. This is a little bit off the top of my head, but I'm still going to share it with you. I think there's something valuable here. 2 bits of advice to the small congregation. Number 1, you struggle with budget, finding volunteers, filling the calendar, doing what you feel like are meaningful things, right? And every congregation struggles with that, but the small congregation often is tempted to feel like they don't have enough. And the first bit of advice I'm going to give you is to knock that idea out of your head and be grateful to God for what you have. You have exactly what God has desired for you to have, to do whatever it is that He's called you to do. And we don't even want to talk about stewardship, what He's called you to do yet. We just want to focus on being grateful to God. You have what you need. Thank God. Get your head out of the clouds when it comes to trying to develop more resources. Maybe there's a time and place for that, but not before you're thankful for what you have. Recognize today you have what you need to do whatever it is that God has called you to do as a church, as a congregation. Okay? So that's the first thing, be grateful. The second thing has to do with the stewardship, and that is think small. And this is really hard for small congregations to do. They're always looking at the example of the really large congregations and thinking they have to be like that. You don't. Think small. It is a gift to be a part of a small congregation. There are many advantages to being a part of a small congregation. Be thankful and continue to think small, right? There are places corporately where we gather together is all of our people, as many of our people as we can find. In the divine service, we're called to work together, right? That's a terrible way of saying it. We're gathered together so that we can be served by God and be given the gifts of forgiveness, life, and salvation. We're supposed to do that together. Scriptures are clear on that. Another place where we're gathered together is when it comes to the care of especially fellow believers, even though this applies to some degree to the larger community also. We're called to pool resources in order to be able to provide care for people who lack what they need. Right? There are all kinds of gaps because of death, because of sin, and we are called to fill that gap, especially among our brothers and sisters in Christ, and to help bear their burdens. We gather together, we join resources so that we can do that more effectively. Another place we're called to gather together is when it comes to doctrine. We're called to unity of doctrine. And as far as that goes, a common practice that gives clear witness to what we believe. So that people, both in the church and outside of the church, are not confused. Part of walking together has to do with unity of doctrine and practice. And so these are 3 places where the scriptures are not clear just 1 or 2 times, but all over the place. These are places where we are called to work together and to gather together. Outside of that, I'm hard-pressed to find anything that talks about us gathering together, creating programs, putting resources together in order to do other things. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but I just mean maybe we focused a little bit too much on creating programs, especially creating programs in order to try to make our church bigger, in order to try to reach out with the gospel. Now, I'm not saying the Bible doesn't talk about reaching out with the gospel, but pooling our resources in order to create big community programs, especially if you're a small congregation, is probably not the best way to go. Again, this brings us all back to my original advice. Think small. And let me give you an example from the scriptures. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25. It says, "Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful." So there you have that community thing. Let us together hold fast to the confession of our hope. And it says, and this is another community thing, let us consider how to stir up one another to love good works, not neglecting to meet together, there's that divine service, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the last day, the day of Christ's return, drawing near. Especially, you hear all the community stuff, but listen, the purpose of the community, one of the purposes of the community is that altogether we would consider how we can stir one another up in doing good works, in loving good works. When it comes to doing that stuff, the good works, it's kind of an individual thing, right? Because each of us are called to specific vocations as fathers and husbands and workers and listeners, hearers and preachers, and I mean we have all these different vocations, right? So the idea is we hold fast to our confession. We have a unity of doctrine and practice that informs our individual vocations. When it comes to loving our neighbor, loving our community, when it comes to sharing the gospel, so much of that in the scriptures is described as being played out by individuals or through families, not necessarily through programs of the church. In fact, I challenge you, and I'm not saying you're not going to find something. I'm asking for your help. Search the scriptures. Give me an example of some sort of corporate evangelism program. I share all this because I think for the small congregation especially, we need to have an emphasis shift. Boards need to be focused on how to train their members to be faithful in their vocations. First of all, helping them understand what their vocations are and what God has called them to do in those particular callings, and recognize that this is where the rubber hits the road. This is the place where people see your good works and glorify God in heaven. In other words, come to faith. So that what's fulfilled when we're talking about reaching out, we're really talking about what Jesus says in John chapter 13. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you, that you love one another. By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So in our coming together, in our caring for one another, the world sees something. They see Jesus. And in our individual vocations, as we go out and just faithfully serve in the vocations that we have, our faithfulness communicates something. That's the love and forgiveness of Jesus. So, small congregations. Number one, be grateful. You have what you need. And number two, think small. We gather together to stir one another up so that we can go out in whatever vocations we have and we can love the people around us. How's that for an evangelism program? God bless you all. God bless your week.